let's talk about the related topic, which is the fear the brands have of discounting, right? Now that they've had a couple of years without discounting, boy, they don't want to go back to the way it used to be. For the most of the time that we've been into watches, discounting wasn't the exception, it was the norm. The brands would do anything, I mean anything in their power, to maintain this thing about not having discounting. And this strategy, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, at the very least prevents there from being discounts for these watches.
This week we go inside the Rolex machine, chat about what keeps the used watch machine going, and we go inside the micro machines for the wrist from G-Shock, Montblanc, Cartier and Kross Studio, which, if I could do a Darth Vader impression, would be happening now. Enjoy the show!
Greetings and welcome to this week's aBlogtoWatch Weekly. David, how are you?
Very well, thank you. And how are you?
Not bad at all. And Ariel, how are you doing?
Really excited about wristwatches.
Really excited. Is it your turn this week to be really excited? Last week it was David's turn to be really excited. It's now your turn.
There was an article in this last week in The Economist about the watch industry. Did you see this?
Did I read The Economist this week? No, Ariel, I didn't read The Economist this week.
Well, it was a book review of a book by someone, I believe her name was Rebecca Struthers, and she's a watchmaker.
I have the book sitting here. Here it is.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, I don't have that. So it got a little book review in The Economist, and it was actually a pretty well written piece. You know, it touches a little bit on the common day culture, but it was a well written article. I thought it was nicely done. Yeah,
it's a really good book. Rebecca might well be joining us on the show in a few weeks' time. So there
great!
You go.
That'd be fantastic.
Get to chat with her about it. She's quite the individual.
We got a lot of authors, like on Superlative. You know, we were just talking about the one with Mr. Cunningham, but I have a lot of other authors coming aboard. We're going to do like a full survey of all the things that are being written about the industry.
We were going to talk about him in a minute, but let's talk about him now. Let's talk about the interview you have, as you touched on there, just done with Brendan Cunningham, who is the kind of Rolex marketing commentator, economist guy. You had him on the Superlative show, not this last week, but a week before, I think. Go and check out the Superlative channel for the interview with Brendan. Brendan has loaned his audio to this show occasionally with one or two comments. What was your take on what Brendan was saying? I was particularly interested in the part of the chat which related to Rolex maintaining the AD model while brands, virtually all the other big Swiss brands, are at least dipping their toe, if not going entirely into the wholly owned distribution model. What was your thoughts on what Brendan was saying about that?
It was a great conversation. We did touch on a lot of things. The thing that comes to mind first is when I visited Rolex, right? Because I did the interview prior to Watches and Wonders. And when I was at Watches and Wonders, I visited with them. I went to a press event. And I asked somebody there, I was like, I just interviewed this guy, Brendan Cunningham. What do you think about him? And of course, the people at Rolex are paying attention to this. And the thing they said was kind of interesting. And they were like, well, this guy knows some things, but not everything. I'm like, okay, hold on. In fairness to Mr. Cunningham, he didn't have that much to go off of. He had these letters from, I think it was the 1960s, between Rolex and this agency in the UK. And they're very telling. And he extrapolated what he could from that in the information. Rolex likes to get snooty about how no one really knows all the whole story, but they themselves won't tell anyone the whole story. So they're upset that the hackers haven't gotten through, even though they're doing everything possible to keep the hackers out.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're not a brand that really presents their history except through their watches, and even then it's a bit vague. They don't have a museum, or do they? Or they don't have a
no.
They don't have some sort of presentation the way that Patek do, or
they have exhibitions. Is what they have. So every once in a while you have exhibitions, small setups where you can go and look at some watches. They had one of those, for example, at Watches and Wonders. They have some at HQ, some at different locations, but it's rare and it's hard to find, that's for sure.
And do they delve much into the history of and the currency, if you like, the current of how the brand actually works, or is it all just here's our watches?
No, it was a very in-depth thing, an in-depth look at the Daytona, for example, with very specific pieces and explanations and so on.
But one of the things you were touching on, Ariel, in that interview was just what drives the brand, these kind of semi-unknown, semi-unwritten rules about the foundation and how it works and what its aims and objectives are and what it tries to do, and just how it all holds together.
I think what I find fascinating, and we talked about this as much as can be talked about, is trying to dissect the business model that is Rolex today, that was Rolex yesterday, that was the entity that Hans Wilsdorf himself put in place when he died. We know that he had a very elaborate plan for sort of what he thought Rolex should be, and that has maintained until to this day. And there's no place out there that really sort of discusses this in any detail. You just sort of, again, have to extrapolate it and sort of learn. So it's very interesting to talk about Rolex and ask these questions, and you can sort of draw conclusions, and there's little bits and pieces here and there. But this is not a company like we've been talking about that it's made its history, its governing documents, its even its structure, its real structure public. And it's very fascinating to do that. And again, I have a good relationship with Rolex. I'd say aBlogtoWatch does in general. And we do respect this sort of level of discretion they want to keep. So we're not here to sort of be like, I found something out. But we do like to discuss it because they enjoy the conversation. They themselves can't give us this information, so they're almost like happy. They're like, oh, you found it a different way than through us. Great. Someone can tell the story now. So it's actually a wonderful and robust topic, but no discussion ever feels like final because there's still so many questions at the end of the day.
You also had an interview this past week, actually not the most recent one, but the week before, with Zoe, who used to be, people will be familiar from our work online with Watchbox in Hong Kong. And one of the things you touched with her and also with Brendan was about the marketing spend of Swiss watch brands and how, not mean's not the right word, but careful they are in comparison to other luxury brands. And this is something you've touched on before about just how much money Rolex spend on marketing and the extent to which the money that they spend on marketing effectively markets all the other Swiss watch brands, which means that if you were to remove Rolex from the equation, suddenly you would have a complete dearth of actual advertising in general. And both Brendan and Zoe and yourself touched on those topics. Is that still true? Or is it the case that the other brands have now realised, wait a minute, we actually need to spend a significant amount of marketing now and get up to the kind of percentage levels that Rolex are doing?
It's a very good point. What I think I've come to recognize over the years is how there's sort of a lot of bluffing that happens. Brands want to pretend that they're as big as someone like Rolex, but don't even have anywhere near the types of budgets. And so they tend to use what they have a lot of, which is, talking. And that's really what they have, is just their voice. Rolex happens to be fortunate. They have a huge amount of money and they can do things. Other brands are in a lot of ways benefiting from the larger, I guess you could say, power that is Rolex. It creates a lot of demand. So I think that there's a large awareness that most brands spend far less than Rolex. But I don't know it's as easy as basically saying, oh, well, we'll just decide to spend more. I don't think they can. They don't want to admit it. And I think it's dangerous for them to admit it, right? The market, consumers want these brands to be all powerful. And the reality is most of them are not. So it's an interesting discussion, but I'd say that what ends up happening is far more complicated than them just deciding to spend more or not.
I mean, one of the other things to touch on with Brendan, which relates to this kind of financial thing, which I'd never really considered before, even having been at Watches and Wonders a couple of times and seeing all of the authorised dealers visiting the Rolex boutique, is that Rolex are working off of a kind of positive cash flow model, that they're actually waiting for the pre-orders. And I suppose in all of the hype about Rolex and waiting lists, I've not actually given much thought to the process that still goes on in the background, which is authorised dealers coming and placing an order with Rolex. Okay, they may not know when they're going to get these watches, and there may be a limit to how many they can order, but that there's actually a financial exchange that happens at that point. The authorised dealer puts down a pre-order and puts down a deposit or some amount of payment with Rolex in advance for these watches. Can you just expand on that kind of line of thinking that you explored with Brendan in the show?
Well, it really has to do with risk distribution. Rolex has a model where they rely on third-party money, and that is the retailer's money, to invest in the production runs of the goods. The idea, and if you're sort of an industry, having inventory is a liability, right? Because as inventory gets older, its value goes down. Inventory is expensive to make, it's expensive to move, it's expensive to own, it's expensive to insure. And so people want to get rid of inventory as quickly as possible, and they want to limit their liability in terms of how much they spend into it. So Rolex basically won't make a giant production run of watches. I mean, they make about 1 million watches a year. That's huge amounts of just think of the metal. And what they do is they secure pre-orders from the retailers for large amounts of money, which they then use. So Rolex isn't dumping its own money into these huge production runs. Even though it can afford it, it's not, because what it does is it distributes risk. So if there's a problem with the market, something like that, the retailers, in a lot of ways, are kind of screwed. But they invested in a prospective thing. And so the way that Rolex sees it is it's shared risk. You are investing money, you're getting this a wholesale price, and we are doing our darndest to make sure that people want this product so that when you get them in the store, they'll be, possible to sell. And so that's sort of the bargain, I think, that if you'll sort of call it, that Rolex has with its retailers. But the reality is Rolex does hold most of the cards and most of the leverage and power in this relationship.
Yeah, I think it's something that's maybe got lost in the conversation, is that Rolex are still working with that model, and that's why they keep all the ADs, because effectively they're using the authorised dealers to fund their cash flow position, in terms of the production of the goods. I think we just think of Rolex as being this wealthy company that sells everything it makes as quickly as it can make it, that we don't actually think about still the nuts and bolts of the financials that are going on in the background. But great interview with Brendan. Go and check that out on Superlative. It does lead us into some other moves in the online retail world, one with Rolex, one with a number of other brands, and the one with Rolex has been reported a couple of weeks ago. It's you can read more about it from our friends at Watch Pro, and this is the extending of the certified pre-owned model with Rolex now into the States. No surprise that it stays with Bucherer, who were the first ones to be utilising it in their stores in the UK. Gentlemen, any experience? David, have you come across anyone that has bought something certified pre-owned for Rolex or had a good look at it?
Not yet. I think it's, the whole system is in its infancy very much to this point. So we're just still seeing these news that it's coming slowly. And I've heard rumors that it's going to be extended to Europe and different bits of Europe and retailers here, but I can't really share any more than that. And again, it remains to be seen how quickly this expansion happens. I think it's still going to be a while before we see people running around with certified pre-owned Rolexes on their wrists.
It's certainly, from our discussions with Rolex, the vast majority of the work is with the authorised dealers. So the setup, the buying, the refurbishing, the repairing, all seems to rest the risk with the authorised dealer, and all that happens is a thing at some stage gets sent to a Rolex service centre to be approved that it's all been done correctly.
I'm not even sure they all need to go to Rolex.
Is that right? You think some of them they just
the way but that's what I thought at first. I thought this is just a Rolex service, but what I've realized is that, and this is why it's being rolled out slowly, Rolex goes out and independently, we'll call it, certifies the stores, which means they're in-house watchmaker or watchmakers. So it has to be a store that has these watchmakers, and they have to fulfill some process. Remember, these are people that are already doing a lot of Rolex service to begin with.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of new processes here. It's not that big of a deal. And then there's the the white tags. So really the big investment here is white tags. That's the big change.
Good stuff. And this kind of then rolls into another brand that we have a lot of dealings with. They're good friends at eBay. They have extended their approved scheme. You know, get your watch checked out if it costs so much money. If you're buying it online, then their own people or their own program confirms it, or the authenticity guarantee. This is now being rolled out to a brand certification program, and this basically appears to be acting as a channel for brands directly to get access to obviously the eBay market and everything that goes on there, all the statistics. Ariel, have you had much conversation? I see Zodiac are one of the early users. The two brands that probably jump out to us watch geeks is Zodiac and Pearly. But Zodiac's probably the one that most people would have some recognition of, would maybe have some knowledge of. And Zodiacs are not normally all that expensive, so not many Zodiacs will cross the $2,000 threshold of their current certified scheme. What's the thinking here? What's your discussions been like with the folk at eBay about this? We covered it on the website recently.
eBay has really been trying to expand the types of transactions that you can have on the platform. For many years, it was a great place to go and buy a used watch. And let's be honest, the gray market, that's where the gray market like to be. More recently, eBay has transformed and is now selling luxury watches directly from the brand to the consumer at prices that the brands want. This supplements all the other stuff on eBay. But what they've done is sort of said, you can get everything on eBay now, from a watch that's brand new with a warranty from an authorized dealer or the brand itself, to a pre-owned watch from someone like you. That's essentially where we're at. And so it is really up to the brands and the companies out there to sort of make the most of this. This is something that they're really trying to figure out, and I think that you have these sort of early adopter brands, but this is actually a very good tool. eBay has a lot of people, and people are already going on eBay anyways. A lot of these watch brands don't need to have their watches in dozens and dozens of outlets. They need just a few, and having your sort of online base be eBay sometimes makes more sense than having your own website, really, because you're not really getting a lot of traffic to it. So what we're seeing right now is this amazing evolution in the e-commerce space. There's going to be all these options. eBay has been a place where people have been buying watches since the 1990s and today. And I think they're doing what they need to do by experimenting with a lot of different types of things and trying to be a great place for the brands. Because again, it's an incredibly fragmented market right now when it comes to buying a watch online. Trust is a big deal. And what happens if something goes wrong with your transaction, and no one worries about doing an expensive transaction on a trusted company like eBay. And they have all these tools that if you don't get the watch you expect, there's a problem, they help you out. And oftentimes you buy directly from a brand, there really is no recourse if there's a problem. So this is really where a lot of people are purchasing their watches, and it just makes sense for brands to be that much more integrated. But again, we'll see in a couple of years which brands make the most of it. eBay themselves, you talk to them, they recognize it really is up to the brand to make the most of it. The brands need to make sure that their prices are right, their postings are right, and things like that. It's still a competitive place out there, even if you are on the right platform.
So, I mean, Zodiac, Konstantin Chaikin, two brands at either end of the spectrum. So Zodiac are owned by Fossil, not a small company, not a company lacking in stores and, the ability to get the watches to market. What's in this for Zodiac on the one hand, and Konstantin Chaikin as a very small retailer with I don't know if there are actually authorised dealers for Konstantin Chaikin as opposed to just the occasional store that gets the occasional one in. That's the thing, what's
right?
the advantage at either ends of the market?
if you don't have an authorized dealer, this is a really good option because, Konstantin Chaikin has plenty of notoriety, right? There's a lot of awareness. They arguably don't need retailers to create more of that, but they need retailers to help sell. And for whatever reason, they just haven't been able to figure out with retailers. So now they can sort of do it themselves through eBay and reach an awful lot of people. There's a lot of advantages for them. So I don't know all the numbers, but it could actually end up being quite an advantageous type of situation for a brand like Konstantin Chaikin. Zodiac, it's almost like, well, what do you have to lose? Right? Like, it's not a bad thing. They're authorized dealers. I'm sure at some point will be allowed to do it, or they're starting with at least a few. So I think that we have recognized that there's probably too many places to buy watches online right now. And I realize that that's not because there's just so much activity going on. It's because everyone feels like there's something wrong with that place. I can improve upon it. I can improve it upon it. So there's a lot that can be improved about the process. And I'd say a company like eBay is probably in a better position to spend money and make buying an expensive watch, a good process online than some brand and their investment in their little, Shopify store.
So when I think about buying watches online from like used retail or, kind of the big guys, the four I think of are eBay, Chrono24, Watchbox and Watchfinder. In the kind of, and there are lots of others, some very big ones, just not ones I happen to use or surf very often. All of these guys are coming from a slightly different angle in terms of how they're trying to grow their market base. David, who at the moment do you think it's not winning a war, but it's, there's definitely competition between all of these. And on the one hand, they're working together, a number of them, and they're competing with each other. Who is getting the most additional traction at the moment in terms of these kind of four different propositions of buying used watches?
Well, I think, I keep reading these news every once in a while as some of these emails pop in saying, the used watch market is X billions of dollars worth, so, and that always is just like, it raises an eyebrow because obviously there are that many. It's easy to calculate how many luxury watches are out there. But when I see that amount of money just being out there and who's making that or where's the potential, what I picture is a bunch of watches sitting in drawers for one reason or another and not getting listed. And maybe it's because, it would be easier for these people if you could just go into a boutique and have it, as a CPO, you turn it in, you get a discount from the new watch and then, just be done with it. I think the problem with used watches is that they are expensive enough to be an absolute headache to deal with when it comes to selling and escrow and trust and whatever else and scams and all that, whether you are a seller or a buyer, but are sometimes not expensive enough to actually do something with them. So they are just sitting around losing money sometimes or oftentimes. So basically my answer would be is that I think there's still a lot of potential for all parties in this, both in terms of amounts of money to be made, but also in terms of the number of watches that are sitting in drawers and waiting to be sold to a new owner, right?
Ariel, David has just given a very you response to that by not actually selecting one of those four organizations. What do you think? Do you think there's one route that is being developed by either eBay, Chrono24, Watchfinder, Watchbox that appears to be getting more traction at the moment than others? I mean, I think from my point of view, I think eBay in the last 18 months have done extraordinarily well with their kind of whole approval process. I think that's been an absolute home run for them. But this market moves very quickly. Are eBay keeping up the pace? Are others now catching up? Chrono24, to my mind, is just in the complete doldrums for whatever reason. How do you see the market developing? I don't
think anybody is moving faster than eBay. I don't see brands themselves innovating in these types of areas. About, I don't know how many years ago it was quite a while ago now, Amazon wanted to do this. They were very gung-ho about being an authorized dealer for a whole number of watch brands. their model was different because Amazon purchases inventory, and that was going to be their idea. They abandoned it not because it was a bad idea, but because they had some managerial changes, and so some new managers came in and just simply shelved the project, as far as I understand. So that was something that was abandoned by them and really not returned to. eBay is the big one. I don't see Walmart doing it. I know it's not sort of a direct comparison, but a lot of people see that as being, a competitor. As you said, Chrono24 is sort of a different beast, but it is what they say is a direct competitor. eBay is obviously far better funded than that, and I'd say Chrono24 hasn't moved a lot. Rather than wanting to be a great marketplace, they have shareholders, so what do they want to do? Make more and more and more money. And again, we recognize not exactly compatible. This industry doesn't want to make money for shareholders. It wants you to make something as efficiently as possible, and I totally understand that. So, I'd say that, eBay is in as good a position as anyone, and this does require time and effort and money. We discussed it other times on the show how for a retailer to invest in just an e-commerce store is like running an entire other business. They need to have a designer, they have to have a web developer, they have to have content creation, they have to market it. It's like having a whole other store. And so I think what everybody's recognizing is that e-commerce is both necessary but hard and expensive.
Good stuff. Well, the competition between these platforms is going to continue to develop, and the innovation will no doubt continue to come along. So keep an eye out at aBlogtoWatch.com for the news as it continues.
Hi, I'm Ariel Adams, founder of aBlogtoWatch, with a message from eBay, a platform I probably use daily. Make sure your watches are the real deal with eBay Authenticity Guarantee. I believe it's the first and best service of its kind that protects your luxury purchases and checks each watch individually at eBay's highly reputable authentication partner, Stolen Company, in the United States. From band to bezel, their authenticators ensure each wristwatch matches the eBay listing and is the real deal. Authenticity Guarantee is also very fast. Once authentication is complete, your watch is securely delivered via rapid 2-day shipping. Surprisingly, eBay's Authenticity Guarantee service is free for all watches priced $2,000 and up. No one should buy a luxury item without an Authenticity Guarantee. Do what I do and check eBay before each watch purchase, because everyone deserves real.
First up today, something I think many of us have been waiting for a long time. I'm not sure this is quite the answer, but this is Casio introducing the G-Shock Move DWH 5600 fitness tracker watch. And this appears to be a square 5600 that actually has some proper fitness tracking functionality that G-Shock, for all its toughness, its ruggedness, its ability, just doesn't seem to have been giving the marketplace. But finally, it's kind of bringing a little bit of the game back to the Apple Watch. What do we think about this development? Is it too late for Casio to ever really get much of this marketplace? Or is this a sign of things to come, Ariel?
Well, I mean, Casio has done it all at this point. They've had full-on smartwatches. They've had all kinds of hybrids and everything in between. The majority of their newer watches have Bluetooth in them, which allows you to update the time and has connectivity to an app. So I'd say that, Casio's, for the most part, dedicated to many, many years of integration with phones as well as software. The products that best use these new opportunities is what they're trying to figure out. They did not like having to be withheld in terms of development by, Google's operating system with Wear OS. They just didn't like that they couldn't mess with it, and there was a lot of issues with it. They have made the strategic decision that they're not going to try to write their own smartwatch software, which I think is a good idea. A big company like Samsung tried to do that with Tizen, and I don't know, it's kind of mediocre. So that's another thing. So they're coming out with these watches that are what we would call a hybrid, but really are a modern smartwatch version of the G-Shock. You have these MIPS screens. I'm holding the GBD H2000 in my hand right now, which is a slightly more advanced version than the one you're talking about, but similar generation, same operating system. And this introduces, a whole new level of functionality and way of operating with a G-Shock. And it's sort of a strange thing because for many years, getting a G-Shock, it was like the same experience over and over and over again. You knew how to use it. You knew how to set the time. Now there's sort of a bit of a learning curve, but what comes with it is a whole new level of functionality and opportunity. So is this the future of G-Shock? Yes. How many years will it take before we figure out what the right size or design or price point or whatever is going to be? Again, it's a moving target. Every one of these I see, every single year, there is significant advantages and improvements and things like that. The one I'm holding right here is like a lot lighter and smaller than the one that came just a year before it. So I'm excited by the actual innovation here. And all I know is that Casio keeps being able to make these better all the time, which means there's just a large horizon of innovation available, and that's exciting.
See, I think the thing with a fitness tracker watch for us as watch geeks is like an Apple Watch. You need to feel comfortable wearing it on one wrist while you continue to wear a mechanical watch on the other. So I wear both. I'm also a type 1 diabetic, so my Apple Watch also monitors blood sugars, etc.
Yeah.
And I think the issue with where Casio are in this process at the moment is they haven't yet created a watch that, to my mind, I would wear at the same on one wrist while wearing a mechanical watch on the other. Because if you've got a fitness tracker, then it's all about the permanence of tracking your steps, your heart rate. It needs to be permanently there. I'm just not sure that they've quite developed enough smartness on this watch for you to want to wear it full time while wearing
Richard,
something
let's
else
be
on the
honest.
wrist.
Casio does not have users like you in mind. They do not think that you're going to be wearing...
What do you mean? I object to that statement.
Oh,
of course they
do. What else do they have to do with think of me?
Exactly. Well, why are they not thinking of me at every moment of their waking life?
Well, look, the reality is that they are not assuming that you're going to be wearing two watches. That should be your one watch as far as they're concerned. This is the timepiece. This should do it all. Why would you have to have another one? They can understand maybe you wanting to take a sports watch off when you are at a social event or some type of prestigious gathering, and they totally get that. But they're trying to make a watch that is sort of you wear it all the time. That's their goal. It's not a backup timepiece. That's not their mindset.
See, and I'm not sure that's right. Like, I think that should be their mindset. I think that's where the opportunity lies in this product, is making it such that people want to wear this as an alternative to an Apple Watch, as a much cheaper alternative out with the Apple universe, and that they can also maintain the wearing of a mechanical watch. David, what do you think? Is this the sort of thing you would wear permanently and dispose of a mechanical watch, or you'd feel comfortable double wristing with it?
There's no way in hell I would wear this all the time. Actually, I'm not even that much of a fan of these overcomplicated G-Shocks, but I see the niche here. I appreciate Casio trying to squeeze as much functionality into these as possible. And sure, I think for people who get mad after their Apple Watch gets scratched or destroyed easily or whatever else, and they don't really care for a big screen that's always flashing in their face, but they do need house tracking, I think this is great. But I'm not really sure how much of a planned purchase this is, as opposed to just going into a mall and shopping around and saying, oh, well, I will stretch to this, as opposed to getting the basic version of this G-Shock and just picking this one up for the added functionality. I think that's where this can be successful, as opposed to this being the be-all and end-all of planned health tracking purchases or one watch to wear all day long purchases. It's a great design. I like it that it's all black and matte, and these are very comfortable. So you could get away with wearing this for all things outside of formal occasions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not an expensive watch for what it is, $299 appears to be the retail. There's also a blue one available. Is it just me, or can anyone else never remember, once they take one of these watches off for more than a day and a half, how to use it?
Oh,
I every time I put one of these on, having not worn it for a while, I can never remember how to reset the thing or the functionality. it seems to be instantly forgettable. I have to go and trawl the internet for the handbook as to how to reprogram it.
It's better. It's better than it used to be. Some of the worst ones were like back when you had some of the early Citizen, like all analog ones. You had no idea what to do. But once you have the ability to connect it to your phone app, you can do a lot of the adjustments from the app itself, which is great. So assuming it's paired to your phone and you know the basics, it's actually easier than you think. I mean, the one that really has a steep learning curve is like a Garmin, in my opinion.
I own one of these more basic ones, and I stopped adjusting for daylight savings time. I can't. I've owned it for like 6 or 7 years, maybe more, and for the last 2 years it was stuck in one setting or the other, and it's impossible. And every time I look up the manual, and I do the exact same thing that I've been trying, and it works. But it makes me look it up in the manuals. I have to go online, Google the module number, which is cool that Casio actually does that, so that you can look at the case back and look at that 4-digit code, and you Google that and you get the manual for the module, as opposed to having to go through all those steps to find your specific watch and then go to this product page. So that's cool. But yeah, I was like, it's just whatever. And half of the year it's correct, which is great. And it's radio controlled too, but DST information is not passed through radio control.
All right, okay, interesting. Yes, I think there's probably a few people out there will have stories of just the frustration of trying to get one of these things to set, especially the non-Bluetooth versions. Anyway, you can go and check out the article at aBlogtoWatch.com. You can also join the Discord channel. Go and search out our Discord channel. Come and have a chat with us about this watch and many others that are featured on the channel. David, you did an article on a fascinating watch that we saw at Watches and Wonders. This is the Montblanc 1858 Secret, the Unveiled Secret Minerva Monopusher Chronograph. You seem to be quite taken by this watch. Give us an insight into what's particularly special about it.
Yeah, this is a very cool watch. It actually debuted last year in a different version. So this flipped movement or inverse movement has been around for a few years now from Montblanc, Minerva. But basically what it is that they've re-engineered one of those famous and beautiful Minerva hand-wound lateral clutch chronograph movements, so that all the goodies are on the dial side. So you can look at all those beautiful parts moving, and you have that huge balance wheel taking it at a leisurely pace of like 2.5 hertz, 18,000 beats per hour. So it's just a fantastic looking movement that's finally on display. And as opposed to other chronographs that are skeletonized on the dial side with all the good stuff still on the case back side, here you have a solid case back. There's really not much left on the case back side to look at anyway, because you have basically everything right in front of you. And it's just a stunning watch. It looks great on the wrist, and I really like this specific model because it has this worn steel case. They PVD coated it, and then they put it in a bag, basically, or a box with a bunch of stones. At least that is what they say. So basically it's a stone washed steel case with an 18 karat solid gold fluted bezel on top, and of course this open work dial and open work movement. And the whole thing has this 100-year-old explorer watch that somebody left, and you inherited, and you found it in a box somewhere. And that vibe was very strong about this watch to me. And I just like it that it's telling a story that I made up in my mind just from looking at this watch, as opposed to reading it in a PDF or wherever. So this watch has a soul to it, or has a very specific aesthetic and vibe to it that I really appreciated. And it's expensive by money standards because it's around $40,000, but it's not that expensive once you look at all the hand-finished parts and all the rest of it. And in the article, it's actually $36,500. In the article, I say, it's, we could take it for granted that on a $36,000 watch you have hand finished parts, but you so don't. It's just not the norm anymore. So if you want a really genuinely pretty movement from a historic manufacturer, which Minerva is, then this is actually a very strong proposition from Montblanc. I love it.
Mm-hmm. It has a kind of steampunk type vibe to it, with the case and the slightly brushed faded edges that come pre-worn on it effectively. How difficult is it to actually do what they have done, take a chronograph and put, as you say, the goodies on the front. And if it's not that difficult, and I'm assuming your answer is probably it's really difficult, is it not something more brands at that kind of 30, 40 grand should be looking at doing?
Well,
is it reasonably straightforward?
So the thing, I think what you do is you don't flip the major parts of the movement. You flip the time display. So you don't take all the balance wheel and escapement and going train and the lattice clutch and all the displays and wheels and gears and cams and all the rest of it off the chronograph and try and engineer it onto the dial side. But what you do is you take the movement, flip it around, and engineer a way for the hands to come out on this side and rotate in the correct direction. So what you need to do is find the space for those wheels for the hour and minutes, and also for the center chronograph is probably not that difficult, but the hours. And of course the keyless works also has to somehow adjust it. So it's not easy to answer your question, but it's definitely not that hard. Here, it's a historic movement that's been around for ages, and wow, it's just so great to see it. I think that also adds a twist to this, because if you see a modern movement these days, we might have the impression that using CAD and modularity in design, it's easier to do it. But this movement was, thrown up and dreamt up by people who are, not in business anymore. And they use, pen and paper and engineering drawings to figure it out. And now you have a twist on it. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, cool. Ariel, Montblanc versus Minerva. Should this be a Montblanc? Should they just have put Minerva on the dial and have it as a high end? I'm still confused by Montblanc's approach.
I mean,
to
this
kind
has
of
been a
dropping
conversation for
the
more than a
occasional
decade.
Minerva. Yeah.
Look, Montblanc. Okay, Richemont acquires Minerva. Richemont decides what to do with Minerva. Make a long story short, Montblanc gets Minerva. Montblanc gets to decide what to do with Minerva, and there's one camp which says, let's make it Montblanc, and there's another camp that says, let's keep it Minerva, and the reality is that, no one's really right or wrong. It's just a matter of taste. I think what's interesting is that they haven't just made watches that say Minerva on the dial yet. We thought it would come. It probably will at some point. But them coming out with Minerva heritage models that just say Minerva and maybe Montblanc on the back, it's just a matter of time. I don't really care. I just think that the Minerva logo looks cooler on these types of designs, a sort of cursive one, than the Montblanc one, which is a little bit more modern and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's all the same company. No matter which of those names is promoted, Montblanc wins, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really love pretty much all the watches that Montblanc produce at the moment. I just think that, I love all the watches produced, and yet you go along to what... it wasn't the worst stand at Watches and Wonders, but I think it was a mistake putting an enormous pen in the middle of the stand. It's like, here we are, we're Montblanc, we want you to think about us as watchmakers. Oh, I know what we'll do.
Here's
we'll put an enormous
pen.
fountain pen in the middle of the stand, just to remind you, we know you're fountain pen makers. You're trying to make us think of you first as watchmakers. Why are you putting an enormous fountain pen in the middle of your stand? Now, it was very impressive. It was a great stand.
Come on,
and there
the
was some
stands,
great
all the
releases this year.
Richemont stands was a race to the bottom. They were having competition of who could spend the least. I'm telling you, they all decided to spend very little, and they're like, okay, everyone, focus on one emblematic image
Yes, it was
to
about that.
define your theme.
So let's define. So Montblanc had a pen, Panerai had sails, JLC had a waterfall. Who had what else? Who else was there? But it was kind of like that everybody had one thing they could spend their budget on. And so that's what they went through.
And the waterfall honestly felt like the most expensive one. They won some raffle.
yeah.
They're like, okay, you get to be, near the front where there's something cool. I mean, next year there's going to be a booth with live peacocks.
David's very excited about that.
They belong
The
there.
GLC stand I think was the best, but that was for many reasons. The waterfall there just meant it was a nice, refreshing place to go in this stuffy environment. So come and have a view of this Montblanc watch. It's very impressive, and I think, as you pointed out, David, for 36 grand, this does appear to value for money, if such a thing exists,
Yes.
in a $36,000 watch. Ariel, we touched on it a little bit last week. The show was a day late, so we missed doing all the May the 4th be with you gags on May the 5th, but you visited Kross Studio, which on one of our Watches and Wonders episodes, you gave us this was one of my impressive visits that I wasn't expecting type thing, was to Kross Studio. Now, I think it's fair to say that the one thing that Kross Studio specialise in is not environmentally friendly packaging, like many watch brands are leaning into at the moment. So,
What do you mean? You're not going to throw these away?
Well, okay, fair enough. Yes, okay, that's true. They're not disposable. They're not disposable. So, what particularly impressed you about their Star Wars collectibles? And are you trying to justify buying one of these while you buy your son like some Lego Star Wars? Toys for the boy and then toys for the big boy.
Well, I think it goes back to one of those strange things that all watch lovers have in common, and that is an appreciation of models, miniature models. We love it when we make things really small and a huge level of detail. And, that's very true for wristwatches, and it sometimes translates into the packaging. And in this instance, it really did. It really just translated into the packaging. And so this is just model making, and it's highly detailed model making of something you think is cool. Look, I grew up, painting and building these models. I did a lot of this with my father growing up. It was something that was like emotional to me. So I'm sitting there having a moment with the founder of Kross Studio, and we're just like, wait, you built models as a kid? I built models as a kid, and here we are, randomly in Geneva, and someone's going to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars on this stuff that it's basically like this weird validation of your childhood. And it's really nice that the watch industry exists as this sort of strange place where you can either play or hope to play, right? Like you have the money and you can dedicate your life to play, or with the watch you can play a little once in a while. And again, I there hasn't been too much discussion about it. I don't know how people are into the topic, but these are toys. We play with them in more or less the same way as we did when we were about 7 years old.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation about model making. It's certainly something I used to do as a kid and actually as an adult. David, did you come from this sort of background of getting yourself covered in sticky glue and enamel paint as a child?
A little bit, yes, but I have really poor dexterity, which is really bad for these kinds of things, So, which is ironic because now I have a watchmaker kit from initium.ch. They sent it out, and it's actually a kit for you to make your watch.
It's cool.
So
I'm excited to see the result, David. I want to see this.
Oh my God. I still have to figure out how to make a watch and document it in a qualitative way. So I still have to find a friend or someone who take pictures of me, fumbling with my fingers and this whole thing. And it's a really cool project, but it's too nice for me to mess it up. So I really want to do it right, but it's really not easy to create a situation in which I do this thing justice.
This is why I volunteered David for this job.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
I will get on a plane from Edinburgh, David, and come and give you a hand.
Thank you.
Please do.
It's such a cool concept, though, because they send the full kit, all the parts you need, plus the tools. And then what is it, David? There's videos you watch, or how does it work?
It's a full thing. So yeah, they walk you through the whole thing, but it begins with a configurator online. So you have multiple different cases, multiple different movements, dials, hands. So you make a watch. You end up putting together a watch that you put together in a configurator, which is actually pretty expansive in a way that you have lots of options. So you feel like, oh, this is my watch. I even designed it. So you grow attached to it, and of course, yes, there are different ways in which they help you, and that begins with them providing the tools as well for an additional 500 Swiss francs or something like that. So I should have everything, but I dread the moment of actually starting it. So I don't want to just have all of these things exploded all over my desk and then just be there every once in a while. I want to do it in one sitting and see how it goes.
David has everything he needs except the basic skill and talent to do the job.
Yes, thank you.
Great stuff. So have you got the simple three-hander, or did you order the Westminster chime?
Yeah, the perpetual Westminster chime. Yeah, I went all the way.
went full hog. Good stuff. Ariel, of these Kross Studio models, which one would I assume, bear in mind the price point of these things, that these are incredibly high quality. They're not made of plastic that you have to de-spur with a Stanley knife to build, that these are like solid metal and carbon and whatever exotic materials they come up with.
So you're asking which of the Star Wars watches I want to don?
Yeah, well, of the models or the watches.
I mean, look, the model that comes with the Death Star one, that's that Kyber crystal container thing. I mean, that is the most impressive thing. That was the first one they did, and it's so over the top. They're like, we can't do this anymore because like, you can't even lift the thing. So that was like, they're sold out. This is fantasy at this point, right?
Wow.
But the funny thing is that like so far, all the Star Wars stuff they've done for the most part has been centered around the dark side and the villains, right? So I have to really embrace that. I guess I could. I probably always identify with that more anyways. But you know, that's really what you're talking about, is like just choose the character, you know. I mean, the Death Star one is neat looking, the Boba Fett one, I mean, it's just, they're incredible. You look at the detail on the little Slave One ship, like right there on the dial, it's spinning with the tourbillon, like it's insane. This is where one of these like craftspeople under a microscope use like, you know, squirrel hair, you know, like, you know, dot little like wear and tear on the ship like it's supposed to be. Like, how, as like a person, you can't appreciate this insane level of effort on your. That's what we love. We love things that remind us of being a kid. Love things that remind us of power, and love when someone just like struggled for beauty on our wrist. I mean, it's got it all.
Great stuff. Good-o. David, we touched on Rolex earlier on, and the big brand that is everything Rolex, but sitting in with the Richemont owned brands is probably next in line after Rolex and Omega, and that is Cartier, and in particularly the Privé range. You've done an article on the Privé tank Normale in full gold. This does look quite an impressive watch, but I think one of the commentaries you're making on that is about the whole Privé part that is Cartier and why it exists. So tell us a little bit about this watch and about the kind of Privé thing in general.
Yeah, I think this is a good one. This is an interesting one, I should say. It's Tank Normale. It's a small tank that is all gold. The bracelet is like 7-piece links. It's fully gold. It's a ribbon of ostentation, basically, around the wrist. It's very in your face, but it's also very laid back. It has this early 19th century industry magnate vibe to it. It's radiating with that. So it's an impressive watch, and there's a reason why all of us in the room, in this massive room with, I don't know, like 30 or 40 different Cartier novelties, basically the aBlogtoWatch team migrated towards this one. I think this had a certain gravitas, and we all wanted to try it on and take a look. And Jake took some amazing photos of it too, so that's great. And yeah, the Privé is Cartier is saying we are only making roughly 100 of these, or exactly 100, I don't know. So it's like, it's way too limited, and that's the point I'm making in this article. What's the point of making this $40,000, $46,000 gold dress watch and limited to 100 pieces when you're Cartier, the third biggest brand in the industry? This is, in my eyes, the date of Cartier, as it should be. You know, it's a small, ageless, high prestige, high status, all gold watch. And I think Cartier should have one of those, and this would have been perfect for that. And now they go and, you know, it's like Rolex saying, oh, you know, the Rolex Day-Date 36 is so tripping cool, we're only making 100 of them in a year. You know, that's kind of ridiculous. And it's this self-imposed limitation that's been upsetting a lot of fans of different brands, and it just doesn't really make sense to me. And just calling it Privé and adding another 10 grand to the price does not justify it in any way, shape, or form, at least in my eyes.
Well, let's dissect this. I agree with you, David. I think that it sucks, but the brands all know that the era of the hard-to-get waiting list watch, like, that's over. Now is the sort of desperate moment where they try everything possible to lengthen this in whatever way they can. So Cartier knows that if they just make a very small amount of a very beautiful product, it will create demand. So no one's really quite sure how to keep the party going. But what we're seeing now is like all these schemes and strategies to do so. Cartier is one of the first brands that recognize that when you pull a hot product, it just creates more demand for it. And so that's what they do. They have these pillars and they like make them for a little bit and they just like pull it. And then they come back a little bit and they pull it. Like, I'm not saying it's the best commercially, but it makes them feel very safe when it comes to sustaining this perceived demand, which is, again, for them, the most important thing.
That makes sense, absolutely. I'm waiting for the industry to invent or just define again the concept of limited production, and just say that it's in production for a limited amount of time, and then they can tweak, they can do whatever they want. Classic Original did these annual editions of some of its watches, and that was really cool because I felt like, oh, okay, we're making it for a year. Obviously, they made a batch or something like that, but at least you get the impression that it's in production and there's a little bit of a play in terms of how many of them are around, and it also adds a little bit of mystique to it, which collectors tend to love today and also decades later when they're trying to find the origins of this watch. So this would have been a great 2023 Cartier gold dress watch. And once it's gone, it's gone. But to say it's 100, I mean, what's 100 pieces?
So let's talk about the related topic, which is the fear the brands have of discounting, right? Now that they've had a couple of years without discounting, boy, they don't want to go back to the way it used to be. And David and Richard, you know that for the most of the time that we've been into watches, discounting wasn't the exception, it was the norm. So the brands would do anything, I mean anything in their power, to maintain, to the best of their ability, this thing about not having discounting. And this strategy that you point out, David, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, at the very least prevents there from being discounts for these watches, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to find this news from like 2016 or something when Cartier...
Yeah, it was about $400 million worth of watches that Richemont bought back about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To take them out of what they perceived as being the grey market. Do you think it's inevitable that discounting will come back? Is this just a cyclical thing?
Oh, it's definitely inevitable. I mean, this is a total. I love how we're even talking about this. We're saying like, is it going to be the case that when used things aren't as valuable as brand new things? I'm like, well, duh. Used things are never going to be as valuable as new things. It's just we have this investment economy, and we're trying to like, skew everything as valuable art and a important collectible. I mean, like we're all speaking like auctioneers at this point. It doesn't make any sense. So the natural order of things is that used things cost less than new things.
Is, as we touched on earlier in the show, the 4 big movers of used watches, is them getting better at doing what they do eventually going to lead to those retailers of new watches having to discount new watches because the experience of buying cheaper used watches is so much better than it was 5 or 10 years ago?
I don't know for sure, but I know what the brands are sort of thinking. The idea is this. You are a normal consumer, and you heard that a buddy of yours was on a waiting list for the super hard to get Cartier, even though it was $40,000 and there was a waiting list. You now are not really clear about why this is or what this means, but you know that there's some demand at an expensive level. So that when you're in a like Cartier store, when buying that watch that is not limited and does not have that much demand, you're just going to buy it that much more readily, or you're that much less likely to ask for a discount because you're just happy that maybe this will be worth something. It's part of this larger, structure they're trying to build, that this is a valuable brand. And even if not every watch, there's a line out the window or at the door, you should feel comfortable. And Rolex received that in such a big way. So that first there was a few Rolex watches that were hard to get, and then it spilled over because of this larger sentiment about the desirability of Rolex. All these brands would love to have some of that. And so they create these popular watches that are hard to get because they hope that stories of this will land on the ears of people that are buying your basic $5,000 or $6,000 Cartier when they go into a store.
It's so difficult for me to have sympathy for the brand sometimes, and it's, looking at this $46,000 Cartier Privé limited to 100 pieces is just pushing me further in that direction. It's basically my conclusion, but I'm trying my best.
Great stuff. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Please leave us a review on whatever podcast player you're listening to, and please join us on the comment section at aBlogtoWatch.com and on the Discord server, where you can catch up with all the chat directly with us and with many others. David, what are you up to in this coming week, and where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me at aBtw_David, and I'm putting together a freaking watch on my desk, and I am having someone document it. That's the plan.
That's fun. Excellent. Ariel, next week, what's in store for you?
Well, we're getting back to watch review videos on the aBlogtoWatch YouTube channel, so that is something which is occupying my time. I've already recorded a few, and hopefully we'll get some of those up. And next week, I will be traveling to New York City, where I will be attending, I believe, a Doxa event, meeting with the son of Clive Cussler, talking about some new watch, and then I will be seeing all of Ulysses Nardon's latest watches, and probably another freak.
Excellent. Probably, yeah, the chances of another freak are quite high at Ulysses Nardon. Excellent. And you can find me at Rick TikTok, but do, as Ariel said, check out the YouTube channel. It's about to get a bit of a refresh. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak to you all again next week. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Catch you next week.